Right.
We are.
Right.
Coalition Purple back on the air. Yeah, I've been
Hey.
kind of looking forward to
Hey,
this. I
Bill.
think I need a little bit of therapy session. All the crazy, it kind of talks me down off the ledge at times. So I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you today.
All right. So you think I should talk about something therapeutic? Today I have to admit I'm not sure.
I guess political therapy is an oxymoron in some ways.
Yeah. Well,
Anyways.
honestly, though, I think sometimes just venting your frustration as opposed to keeping it contained is actually a good thing. So, I mean,
Totally.
psychology, the psychology, the idea, Freudian psychology, the idea that, you really is just going to talk to somebody and being honest about things and, saying the things that you need to say. And while it's not good for everything, it does work for some things, which is why, talk therapy has been around for as long as it has. So
Yeah.
here you go, talk therapy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So anyways, I finally I remember to remove my microphone over here. So the first part, I probably sounded a little faint, but hopefully it's a little better now. Anyway, so what's going on?
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of things going on that I've been finding really interesting lately, just because the aggression with which the Trump administration has been going after the auditing. And of course, now there's Ukraine stuff, but I'm going to backburner that for a little bit. But I just think that there are things that we can look at from what the Trump administration is doing in both a good light and a bad light. And so to start it on what I think is a good light is, we're always talking about what would be the position of a third party. How could you get people on board? And I think one thing is audit California. I mean, I don't exactly 100% know what's going to come of the Musk audit of the federal government, but we are seeing things that we have never seen before. We are getting information from the government now that we had not seen, that we had not had access to. And again, what the end result of all that will be, I don't know. But at least we're starting to learn about what the people in the government were actually doing. So I think we should do the same thing for California. Let's find out where California is spending all this money, like the $24 billion that got lost going to NGOs.
Right.
Well, let's find out what happened to that.
Right.
And then, we can start making some decisions about, how we might want to look at things or do things differently in the future. But the first step, just like the first step right now with the federal government, is audit California. Let's audit the entire state.
Yeah. Well, I actually, it was funny you mentioned that because as I was trolling through, I don't even know, something popped up in my email. And I think it was a Nextdoor thing. I didn't even go down the rabbit hole because Nextdoor is such a
Nextdoor.
So
has its pluses and minuses.
For me, just having
the title of it was
how
are we going to DOGE California?
Yeah,
to your point, I literally just read that today, and and I can't imagine how anyone can disagree with the concept of, hey, just like your household finances, you need to take a hard look sometimes where things are going because, things just kind of go off the rails at times and you don't even realize it. That's in a good scenario. And then there's also bad scenarios where they're going off the rails because people want them to go off the rails because they're making some extra coin in their pocket, right?
Right.
And no, I hear you. I think it's that part of it is healthy the way they've gone about executing it, and is, I think, questionable, very questionable, just because it's put so much disruption in the system. Mm-hmm. And if the answer is simply, well, we just need to fire a lot of people and then all of our problems will be gone, it's like, well, you can also create problems by doing that too if you're not doing it in a thoughtful manner. So,
and the thing is, I think we can actually do a better job in California because I understand the Trump administration's sense of urgency. I know what they're thinking is, we have to go fast and probably break things because the other alternative is to be careful and go slow. And if they feel that if they go slow, they won't ever get through it all because, the truth of the Trump administration is they have at most 4 years, but they might lose Congress in 2. So essentially they need to audit the entire federal government in 2 years. So it's a trade-off. They've decided that they're going to go fast and break things, which is, Elon Musk style. But in California, if we elected somebody willing to actually do it, they could potentially have 8 years of time to carefully sort through what California is doing, be absolutely transparent with it, and reveal what everything is to the people, but not have to be like, we have to fire this entire agency. We have to take this thing down now. We have to get rid of this now. We have to do this now. And so I think if we did audit California, you could actually try and learn something from the federal audit and actually maybe even do a better job in California than they're doing for the federal side of things.
Yeah. I mean, the size, the scope of what they're trying to do at the federal level is so massive.
Yeah.
That I hear what you're saying on that. Again, it's not so much the idea is a bad one. It's just the approach. And I understand you got to do it fast and all that. But that, and again, because if they didn't couple it with the whole laying off a bunch of people and saying, hey, we're going to just close down the Department of Education, or we're going to close down all of our grant funding for scientific research and medical research and all that.
I'm sort of
it's like, the questions then I'd be totally on board with it. It's just the way in which they did it. They could have had a fan in me, but they don't have a fan in me just because of that approach. And the one that really blows me away is they're starting to go into the military one, into the Pentagon and all that. And they're saying their goal, and this goes beyond the audit to me. They're setting
what do we really need
expectations before they even know what they're talking about yet. But they set the goal of they're going to cut 8% this year, 8% the next year, 8% the next year for 5. So they're going to do that for 5 years in a row, 8%. So if you did that, which I can't imagine they're going to, but if they actually did that, I mean, that would decimate, particularly a place like San Diego. Even 8% was going to have ramifications big time.
Yeah.
When we're, if not the largest, one of the largest military presence anywhere in the country, right? And it's like, hey, it's good to audit that stuff because, hey, if there's any waste, fraud, and abuse, I think it's probably in the military.
Yeah, but, I'm sure there's some there.
But and so I'm all for that. But it's like, to say that you're going to lay off 8% of the people, this year, without any factual basis, you're missing the point of trying to get people on board with this idea, which I think is actually a good idea.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I think that has not been given enough thought to is, I think I heard somewhere that the federal government has 2 million employees. So let's, when Musk came into Twitter, he laid off 80% of the staff. Right. So let's just say he doesn't lay off 80, but he lays off 50. So you've just disgorged 1 million working age people into the country,
right,
who have probably a somewhat suspect skill set because they've been working in the federal government, which is a completely different animal than anything in the private sector. I mean, obviously, some of the people might be lawyers or IT professionals or whatever, and do have a specific skill set. But if you were working for USAID in some, African country, teaching people how to dig a well,
I'm sorry.
Well, when they bring you back to the United States, the well digging profession is pretty well handled by machinery.
And I had to complain about it. It's so hard to know.
You could potentially have a huge number of people that don't necessarily have a place to go, and I think that could have a serious economic repercussions, depending on where they landed or how they were distributed and various things like that. So I think there has to be great care taken when you start talking about laying off that many people, not millions of people potentially.
Right.
So yeah, that's one of the things that definitely concerns me about it. I definitely want the audit.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not 100% sure I want all the layoffs to be done so rapidly.
Right.
Even if you eventually laid off that number of people, if you could do it over a long span of time, I think that would be better. But I mean, again, it's like, you're faced with this weird situation where, the Trump administration is just going pedal to the metal all the time, and again, we'll see what happens in the end.
Right. Well, and again, this is That's why I started out with talking about, and probably a good therapy session to talk about it, because the other part of it is again, looking at the good side of this is, I think what is good about it is it, like to your point, it's opening up just all the things that are going on that we really need to take a healthy look at that. And what it's also going to expose is, and I think this is going to be an interesting reaction coming from particularly the conservative side about how ingrained so many things are in terms of our economy with the federal government in terms of subsidies and all of that. And the good example of that is the whole food industry.
Yeah.
And because I work in that area a lot, I mean, it reminded me of our conversation about the immigration thing, that, you got to really wonder about the economy if you're having, the only way it succeeds is because of black market labor.
Yeah.
The same holds true with food, just in general, the agriculture community. If you actually pulled away all the subsidies and all that kind of stuff out of the food industry, it would collapse.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does not happen without that, right? And so, I mean, one of the big groups that's really starting to become very vocal about this whole process are the farmers in particular, right? Because they've been left holding the bag. They put in an investment in all these kinds of things, thinking they were going to get money out of the federal government,
right,
to help pay for some, or at least provide the loan to pay for some of this stuff. And poof, it's gone. And that's the part that scares me about the whole thing. But it also brings out the passive aggressive part of me in it. It's like, here I thought it was going to be maybe 6 or 8 months before the entire country would melt down. I think we're going to probably reach that in maybe 2 or 3, if the way things are going.
Well, the thing is, like what you're saying too, is also part of the employment issues. So let's say the government has 2 million employees and it loses 1 million of those. So that's 1 million people out. But how many people do these GMOs employ who are no longer funded and therefore go out of business, and then disgorge their employees out into the workforce? And then, as I say, even things that aren't like GMOs, but like industry, farming, everything that gets subsidies that may not be able to maintain those subsidies, how many people do they disgorge into the workforce? And as I say, you could be looking at like depression level unemployment numbers. And it's like, again, this is me speculating because there's so many variables that you don't know what could happen. But I mean, I seem to remember that the unemployment rate during the Great Depression was something like 15 to 20%.
Yeah, if that. It was like I was thinking like 12 to 15, something like that.
Yeah. It's not necessarily as big as people think. It's not like 80% of the people were unemployed.
Right.
And so if we got to say, like you say, like 12% unemployment, well, I mean, that would be catastrophic. I mean, it's not a huge percent unemployment percentage number to be really a problem. I mean, I think,
that ICE is running out of
it could be ugly. It could be very ugly very fast because everything's happening at once, right? It's not just that they're disgorging people from the federal government. It's like all the funds are drying up and all these people are releasing people at the same time. So again, there's parts of it that I like. I want the information.
Absolutely.
And I want the hard decisions to be made. It's just that I think there are certain problems with the speed at which it's going. So, but again, we'll have to see.
Yeah, no, and again, I think my wife hates it when I say this, but it's like, I think in a roundabout way, I'm trying to look at the positive on this. It's like, maybe some really awful short-term pain will be some long-term gain, because it will expose where all the craziness has gone on in one respect. And when I say craziness, I'm not trying to label that Medicare fraud or Medicaid fraud is rampant or whatever. It's really, there's just as much of that we'll find through this process as we do corporate welfare and things like that. I mean, going back to the immigration, is a great example of it. It's like we have a lot of companies who really depend on black market labor, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be, if there is any silver lining, it's going to expose so much of that.
Yeah, and I think that's necessary
but
because
it's going to be pretty painful.
Yeah. But, it's funny. I think one of the very early shows that we did, one of the first ones, I brought up the idea of, how a third party would work and how you'd have to sort of like convince people that it was going to be okay. And I said it, I think at that time is that you have to promise that there is going to be short-term pain, because anytime you change something, there is going to be short-term pain. If you elected me governor, one of the first things that I tell people is there's going to be pain in the short term because we're going to dry up a lot of these things. But you're exchanging that for long-term sustainable growth and economic prosperity. Overall, you're doing more for more people, but that doesn't mean that there won't be some people who are going to be worse off at the end of the day. Anytime you change anything, there are winners and losers. And if you change something as big as the federal government, as fast as the federal government is changing, theoretically, because they haven't actually run anything through Congress yet. But if they do all the things that Musk is suggesting, there will be losers, and that will put people out of work and out of employment and back, either looking for jobs or looking for unemployment pay or whatever it is that they decide they're going to do. And that pain is going to be felt in a lot of places.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to the third party, for me, I also look at it, and maybe I'm just being way too optimistic or passive aggressive, depending on how you want to look at it, that this is the best time for people to start thinking independently. And even if you're still a Democrat or a Republican, at least if you're independently thinking, this is a good time to really get engaged. And I go back to the military thing as an example. It's like here locally that on one side, on the conservative side, I can't understand why any well-reasoned Republican conservative wouldn't be kind of pounding down the door of Darrell Issa, who's the lone Republican congressperson from this area, demanding what is he going to do to stop this from happening to impact the military. The flip side of that is here in the 49th with Mike Levin, it's probably kind of a heyday, because it's like they're not the ones doing it. I bet this is going to be a great fundraising thing, because now Mike Levin can go out and say, I'm going to fight for the, and I'm not saying that he doesn't do that already, but now they can really go out and say, we're fighting for veterans, we're fighting for the military, blah, blah, blah. And none of the bad stuff's painted on him, and so when you look at those two opposing things, all the more reason you need people in the middle to really focus on coming up with the common sense discussion and solutions of it. It's not either or. It can be something more collaborative in the middle.
Well, I think one of the things that, you could also push for, and I think this would be important, would be, educational reform. Because one of the things that I've said forever about education is it needs to be more connected to the employers. So obviously reading and writing is important, and we've recently seen that reading and writing in the United States is terrible. And we should be working on that for sure. But at some point, there should be options to do internships, get training, become part of an industry that you want to be part of. Because people are always saying that, we need people and we need people to do this, we need people to do that. So if, in addition to the federal disgorgement of labor, a place like California said, hey, look, we have a huge number of industries in California of all different varieties. We're going to start training fairs in different parts of California. And because we're going to audit our stuff and we're going to get the $24 billion back, we can use that to now fund, training academies. And we can bring in people from around the country to work in our tech industry, our agricultural industry, our military subsidy industry, our coastal industry, fishing and hatcheries. And there's so many things that you could train people to do in California, things that need, employees, that we could take up a lot of the labor that was coming out and actually put it to really good use and really expand, the economy in California. And the other thing that's going to be coming along is the energy industry. There are a lot of energy resources in California, and we should be building. Well, I think we should be building nuclear power plants. So you could take people and start training them for construction and, these high-end construction jobs and facilities, good paying jobs, and start building the power and electrical infrastructure that we need. Not to mention, let's go back to the water infrastructure that we need.
Right.
There's so many things that you could repurpose this soon to be unemployed workforce, but you have to be proactive enough about it to actually say, hey, let's have these programs, let's attract these people, and let's really make something out of it.
Well, and I think a lot of that's not going to happen unless we have, the kind of a third party independent kind of thinking to force the issue, because people are still entrenched in their two little fiefdoms, right?
Yep.
And it's just such a lack of creativity. I mean, California is a great, but you can say that about almost any state, but California just happens to be so huge that it's so obvious that there's just, you think about back in the day, things like building a Hoover Dam or the interstate road system. I mean, really the imagination and thought to actually imagine that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
We just really don't have that much anymore. We just don't have that leadership anymore.
Yeah.
And it's sad because they're all just vying for power. They're not vying for solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. California's, as I say, we're regressive in California. We're driving away a lot of our, our industry and our, entrepreneurs, driving them into different states. And now would be a really good time to stop doing that and to start doing things that are actually productive and bring people back into the state to do the things that the state needs to have done. And, California, if California could become a leader in, getting things done that are actually valuable to the people of the state, as opposed to being a leader in doing exactly the opposite, that could be good for California, and which could translate to being good for the rest of the country. You just have to have people willing to do things that actually make sense, which all goes back to the beginning of the audit. We need to find out what resources we actually have in this state. The state of California takes in a lot of money. A lot
approach,
and we can do that. It's
remove
our GDP is $3.9 trillion.
More discretion,
and I was trying to find out. I don't even remember why I was looking this up.
To try and get
but depending on who you
in some senses ties
believe,
the hands of the judges,
Russia's
but
not much more than that.
Road,
I mean, California, from a GDP standpoint, is as large, if not larger, than Russia.
Right. So we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of things we could do. But when we lose $24 billion to a bunch of people who are there essentially to facilitate homelessness, not rid ourselves of homelessness, not to help the homeless, but to facilitate homelessness, we've got to change what we're doing and start doing things that actually are more productive and help accelerate our economy. We could get our economy up to $5 trillion.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Now, the contrarian in me sort of disagrees with that, because I still kind of think the ultimate, looking at the short-term pain, long-term gain scenario, that if we just lost a whole bunch of people out of California and spread the wealth across the country, that if I'm looking at it from a United States perspective, that could actually be a better thing for the United States. Not so good for California, but it might be better for the states as a whole. And it would relieve our, traffic and our housing and all that kind of stuff. So part of me is like, I hear you. I totally kind of agree with that. But on the other hand side, again, like I've said many times, if we lost 10 million people and they spread out into the Midwest, into, the South and all that, where, when you look at the wages and stuff in those areas, that's pretty low.
Yeah.
So, if we're looking at it from a United States, that could be a good thing.
Well, as I say, again, economically, nationally, it's hard. It's hard to sort of say. I mean, I'm sure Texas and Florida would love to absorb every California entrepreneur they can get their hands on. Tennessee as well. Kentucky, I think, has been doing some good things. There's lots of, expansion zones within the country that, Californians are already going. So, I mean, but the problem, of course, if you lose all of your entrepreneurs, let's put it this way, if you lose the people that are paying the taxes, well, then, you just go bankrupt that much faster. So,
well, but it also provides a wake-up call to get people back to focusing on what's important, number one, right? And that's I think the reason why, again, that's the short-term pain for long-term gain. That how do you snap an economy in a state as large as California, let alone the federal government, from the stupor they've been in for so long?
Yeah.
And, kind of sitting back happy that, hey, we got all this money, and it's just a hard cycle to break.
Yeah. Well, honestly, strangely enough, I think one of the ways that you break that cycle is you do an audit. Because I think when you start shining light on all these things, it motivates people. Because there's lots of things going on, but the USAID stuff just comes up over and over and over again because it's so atrocious. People they just want to bang on it over and over again because it's so obviously that it's some kind of weird money laundering BS thing. So it's very strange. So if you did the same thing to California, and the first thing that comes to mind is the bullet train, and people could really see just how much money we flushed down the toilet on the bullet train, that might light a fire in them, being like, oh my God, my house burned down, and you just threw away, $500 billion on some stupid train out in the desert that doesn't go anywhere. It's like, okay.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of my point. I mean, that's not a secret. That fiasco is not a secret. And until you figure out a way to get, in that case, Democrats, generally speaking, out of their stupor of spending money like this, maybe an audit will do that. But I think it's one of these things where it's like people just have to be kind of slapped up against the side of the head some way, somehow. And an audit may do it, but I think it's going to take, that's why I'm saying, well, the quicker we go into recession and all that, maybe the faster people will come together and figure out this is really a stupid idea.
Yeah. Well, I told Linda this a long time ago, and I told it to other people too. I think California has to go bankrupt twice. The first time California goes bankrupt, they'll blame it on the Republicans, even though there aren't any. And everybody will be like, oh, yeah, it was the Republicans' fault. And they'll put the Democrats back in. But the second time California goes bankrupt, then people will start to open their eyes and like, wait, we made sure that there weren't any Republicans or anyone else around. We gave you everything. And then we went bankrupt again. It's got to be you. But the question is, how long will it take for California to go bankrupt twice?
Right. Right. No, exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, we seem to learn through big mistakes, as a country. It was the quote, who was it, Winston Churchill or somebody, I'm misquoting him, about Americans usually do the right thing eventually after they've done all the wrong things, or something to that effect.
Yeah, it sounds like something Winston Churchill might say.
Yeah, right. And I think we're kind of in that boat. It's like, it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be a combination of the stuff that Trump's doing, trying to move this way too fast, and the fact that the Democrats, I heard Joaquin Jeffries basically say the other day,
it's a multifactorial problem. There's
nothing we can do. Democrats can do. Yeah, they have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. There's nothing we can do. It's like,
how to treat any
well, now that's leadership.
Yes,
it's like, seriously,
we're generally devoid of ideas.
It just blew me away, and it's like, so you got Trump just going crazy willy-nilly, whether you agree or disagree.
So I really appreciate that
the Democrats just
ability to express how
what can we do?
Well, what are you gonna do?
Really involved in
the thing that I saw today, and I don't know that if this is true. But I saw a headline to the extent that Karen Bass is starting an investigation to find out why she went to Africa when she did.
A greater expanse of ideas to come together to start solving.
It's like
many different.
You went to Africa when you did because you decided to go to Africa. Why do you need an investigation?
You're the one who decided to go. Economics in our big cities are problem after problem.
We really need an investigation for that. I mean, how much money is that going to cost?
I know. Desperation. I hope that's not true.
And that all sort of funnels.
I have a strong suspicion that it actually is, but I really do hope it's not.
And then once that all those people get in the criminal justice
oh my gosh, if you don't know why you were going,
has to treat them all in
we have bigger problems.
We've really got more problems. More problems than we've thought before.
So, anyways, well, I guess we can kind of wrap it up there, and we'll see how if we're still standing next week. and because it's just totally amazing how much stuff is in the air right now.
Oh yeah, I mean there were actually
oh my gosh,
I don't take a lot of notes before the show, but I had 3 or 4 different things.
We could go on forever.
Forever, yeah.
But the flip side of it is between all the lawsuits and protests and who knows what else Trump will come up with, things will be completely different next week, I think.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we'll see, if we're still standing.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just heard that Kash Patel just got all the way through. So, I mean, that's like kind of breaking news right now. So, I mean, that's a huge deal because whatever he comes out and says, I mean, Trump and Musk can be pretty, off the wall, but Kash Patel can be nuts.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
Well, and again, not only from an economic standpoint with all this stuff going on, but with the layoffs and all that, the thing that I think may have even more of a impact is not only financially, but just the mindset and the, how demoralized people are and that sort of thing. And that's when people do some really dumb stuff. I mean, I've been through some of these kinds of similar things back in my corporate life where people get so cynical and demoralized that that's the worst part of it.
Because actually, that it brings. Yeah, and I know we're kind of like at the end here, it's super fast. But one of the things that I had thought about talking about was they dropped the prosecution against Mayor Adams in New York, and there's 2 ways to look at it. One, the prosecution was tainted from the start and it was purely political, and therefore it should have been dropped, or the prosecution had merit and should have gone forward. And if people generally believe that the prosecution had merit and should have gone forward, that's going to give Trump administration a real black eye, and it's going to reflect onto everything else that they do. If people believe that the prosecution was tainted from the beginning and should have been dropped, then it's a win for the Trump administration.
Right.
But when you go so fast that you start to lose your transparency, you're not explaining well enough why you did the things that you did and why the outcomes were what they are. That's when people are going to start to look very, very negatively on things. They're going to be like, they're just doing things randomly. This is unethical. They're not doing a good job. And if it starts to turn around like that, like right now, a lot of people think that Trump is doing the right thing. But as soon as a lot of people think that Trump is doing the wrong thing, then that's when the crazy happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when you're moving so fast, stuff's going to happen. So, no. Again, next week, it'll probably be a completely different discussion. It's like
the sky will still be blue, and then we'll still be alive, and all will be well.
Maybe next week we're going to be talking about how to plant gardens and survive on potato soup and all those kinds of things. So that might be the more germane discussion next week. So we'll see.
Victory gardens. That's what they were. I was
victory
trying to
garden. Thank you.
The gardens in the world were victory gardens. We'll all be worrying about our victory gardens.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you don't laugh about it, you're going to go crazy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was good to talk again.
Talk to you later.
Yep.
Bye.